The first sign that something was wrong came before sunrise, when the rancher stepped out onto his porch and noticed his horse acting strange. The animal stood at the edge of the corral, ears forward, tail flicking with restless energy. It wasn't the kind of energy that came from wanting to run or graze. It was sharper, more urgent, like the horse was trying to say something without a sound. The rancher paused, hand on the railing, studying the animal. He had raised this horse from a foal and knew its moods better than he knew his own. Whatever it had sensed had stirred it down to the bone. A cold wind moved over the land, carrying the smell of dust and the faint scent of something distant. The rancher felt it settle in his chest, that prickling pull toward the open range. He slipped on his coat, crossed the yard, and opened the gate. The horse stepped out quickly, nudging his arm, then turning its head toward the hills as if asking him to follow. The rancher didn't question it. Out here, instincts mattered. Sometimes they were the difference between finding something important or missing it forever. He saddled up in the quiet morning light, the leather creaking softly under his hands. The horse pawed at the ground, impatient. Once the rancher settled into the saddle, the animal moved without hesitation, heading straight across the wide field that bordered his land. Dew clung to the tall grass, brushing against his boots as they rode between clusters of low trees. The sun had not yet cleared the ridge, but a soft glow touched the horizon, casting long shadows over the earth. The horse kept a steady pace, ears flicking left and right as it followed some path the rancher could not see. He let the reins hang loose, trusting the animal's instinct. Years of working side by side had taught him that when the horse behaved this way, something waited ahead. Sometimes it was a trapped calf, sometimes a broken fence, sometimes a stranger who needed help. But this time felt different. There was a tension in the horse's stride, a deeper purpose in its direction. They reached a narrow trail that wound between two large boulders, a part of the land the rancher rarely visited. The ground here dipped lower, hidden from sight unless someone knew exactly where to look. The horse slowed at the mouth of the trail, sniffing the air, then moved forward carefully. The rancher leaned in the saddle, scanning the land. He knew every stream, ridge, and patch of sagebrush across miles, yet this path felt unfamiliar. The trail sloped downward, the air cooling as they descended. The sound of wind faded, replaced by a stillness that felt thick and unbroken. Tall walls of rock rose on either side, forming a passage just wide enough for the horse. The rancher narrowed his eyes. He had ridden this land since he was young, yet somehow he had never noticed this hidden cut in the terrain. It was as if the earth itself had hidden it away. Halfway down the path, the horse stopped and lifted its head. A faint sound echoed from somewhere ahead, too distant to make out clearly. It wasn't the cry of an animal or the call of a bird. It sounded almost human. The rancher straightened in the saddle, pulse quickening. He whispered a calm word to the horse, and together they continued down the narrow passage, the noise growing clearer with each step. At the bottom of the slope, the land opened into a wider area tucked between high canyon walls. Sunlight reached only part of it, leaving the rest in shadow. The rancher felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The space felt untouched, hidden, almost secret. The horse walked forward, alert and cautious, sniffing the ground. Then the rancher saw footprints. Not old ones, fresh ones. Too small to belong to any adult. He dismounted, crouching beside the prints. His breath caught. The size was unmistakable. Children, two of them, judging by the pattern. His chest tightened. Children didn't come out this far. No one did. The place was too remote, too well hidden, impossible to find unless guided. He felt the weight of the moment settle on him, heavy and cold. The horse nudged his shoulder as if urging him onward. The rancher rose slowly, scanning the canyon floor. A faint rustling sound drifted from the shadows near a cluster of rocks. He stepped forward, boots crunching softly against the ground. The air smelled faintly of smoke, not from fire, but from something that had burned long ago. He felt every sense sharpen, his mind racing with questions. Then he heard it, a soft cry, not an animal. A human cry, small and trembling. The rancher froze, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He took another step, his voice low and steady as he called out. No answer came. Only another soft cry, then a whisper of movement. He rounded a boulder and stopped dead. There, pressed against the canyon wall, were two girls, both thin, dirty, their clothes worn and torn. Their eyes were wide with fear as they stared at him. They looked as though they hadn't seen another human in months, maybe years. His breath lodged in his throat. The missing sisters. The ones the entire region had searched for 4 years ago. 2 children who vanished without a single trace. Search parties had scoured the land for months before hope faded. Folks assumed the worst. Many believed they were gone forever. But standing here, in a hidden canyon no one knew existed, were 2 girls who should have been impossible to find. The rancher felt his heart hammering in his chest, but he kept his movements slow, careful. He didn't want to frighten them. The younger girl clung to the older one, shaking. The older girl held her protectively, eyes wary but also tired, as if she had carried the weight of both their lives on her small shoulders for far too long. The horse stepped closer, and the younger girl gasped softly, hiding her face against her sister. The rancher reached out a hand, palm open, his voice gentle. He wanted to ask 100 questions. He wanted to know how they had survived, who had brought them here, whether someone was still hiding nearby. But he said none of that. Right now, the only thing that mattered was getting them to safety. Before he could take another step, a faint crack echoed from somewhere deeper in the canyon, not a snap of a twig. Something heavier, something deliberate. The rancher turned sharply, scanning the shadows. The girls stiffened, fear flashing through their eyes. Whatever that sound was, they recognized it. And they were terrified. The rancher placed himself between the girls and the canyon's darker end. His pulse quickened. The land was silent again, but that silence felt dangerous. The horse shifted, hooves scraping the dirt, ears pinned toward the deeper recess of the canyon. Something or someone was there, watching, waiting. The rancher lifted his chin, gaze fixed on the darkness ahead, every instinct sharpening. He didn't know who had kept these girls hidden for 4 long years. And he didn't know if that person was still here. But the canyon felt alive with tension, holding secrets the land had protected for far too long. He reached for the girls, ready to lead them out, but another sound drifted through the canyon, this time closer. He tightened his grip on the reins, heart pounding hard as the shadows shifted at the far end of the clearing. And just as he prepared to take the girls and run, a figure moved in the darkness. The wind settled into a quiet hush as the dust floated down, leaving the field strangely still. Jacob kept his steady hand on the rope, guiding the injured horse toward the narrow trail that led back to his farm. The morning sun was climbing, spreading a soft gold over the land, but the warmth did little to ease the growing worry tightening his chest. He had seen injured animals before, but this one stirred something different in him. The horse had shown a kind of trust, a silent plea for help, as if it understood that the man beside it was its only chance. The horse moved with a slow, uneven rhythm. Every few steps it hesitated, and Jacob could see the tremor in its legs. The bee stings were still swollen, small raised marks that seemed to pulse with pain. Jacob wished he could stop right there, give it water, try to soothe all of it, but he knew they had to keep going. The open field was no place to rest. Coyotes still roamed these parts, and the land had its own quiet dangers, the kind that crept up when a living soul lingered too long. As they reached the first rise, Jacob paused so the horse could breathe. He studied its coat, a dusty brown that might have once been rich and shining. Now it looked faded and tired, like it had spent months wandering without direction. He wondered where it had come from. Most horses around those lands belonged to someone, and folks did not let valuable animals vanish without reason. But the horse had no brand that he could see. No rope marks on the neck, no saddle scars. It carried only the story of whatever hardship brought it into that field at just the right moment. Jacob felt the weight of that mystery as he held the rope. There was something unfinished in the way the horse looked at him. Something that made him think this animal had been running from more than just danger. He lowered his voice and spoke as calmly as he could, knowing the horse understood more than words. He promised he would try his best. He promised the farm was not far. And for a moment the horse lifted its head as if listening. They continued toward the old fence line where Jacob had left his cart earlier. It would be easier to move the horse with the cart once he reached it. The trail narrowed under the shade of tall trees. the crisp smell of pine mixed with the faint scent of damp earth. Jacob cherished this trail. He had walked it since he was a boy, long before he owned anything worth calling a farm. Back then, the land had belonged to his late father, a proud man who believed that every sunrise offered a new chance to fix whatever had gone wrong the day before. Jacob felt that same belief now, stirring inside him as he led the injured creature deeper into the shade. He did not ignore the troubling pieces forming in his mind. There had been whispers in town these past weeks. Stray animals wandering the outskirts. Strange sounds at night. A goat found far from its pen, trembling with fear. No one had put the pieces together, and no one had tried. Folks in small towns knew how to mind their own business. But Jacob wondered if maybe he should not. Maybe this horse was another piece of that quiet puzzle, something larger than a simple accident. The trail curved. The farm was still a long walk away, but the horse continued moving. It surprised Jacob how much strength it still carried, despite the dehydration and the heat it must have endured. Each time it stumbled, it recovered. Each time it shook its head, it pushed forward again. Jacob admired that. It was the same kind of stubborn strength his mother used to talk about, the kind that kept people alive when life seemed to test them again and again. A soft rustle came from the brush. Jacob stopped. The horse lifted its head sharply. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jacob scanned the woods, eyes narrowing as he searched for movement. It could have been a rabbit or a deer, but the woods felt too still. The silence pressed around them. He tightened his grip on the rope. The horse took a step closer to him, like it sensed something familiar and frightening. Jacob breathed slow, calming himself first. The rustle faded, and the woods returned to their quiet state. They pressed onward, but the uneasy feeling followed them. Jacob tried to shake it by focusing on the simple tasks ahead, reaching the cart, getting the horse water, cleaning the wounds, calling old Mrs. Hargrove, the only person around who knew anything close to real animal care. She had tended to his dogs and cattle more times than he could count. She would know what herbs and washes to use. She would know how serious the injuries were. But as he thought of these things, he also thought of what would happen if someone came looking for this horse. What if it belonged to someone who had not treated it kindly? He had seen enough in his lifetime to know that not every animal was blessed with good owners. Some treated animals like tools and replaced them when they broke. His jaw tightened at the thought. He had promised himself years ago that his farm would never be that kind of place. By the time they neared the clearing where the cart waited, the horse slowed again. Its legs trembled. Jacob stepped in front of it, placing both hands on its muzzle to steady it. The horse leaned into the touch. Its breath came uneven. Jacob felt the heat of it against his palm, felt the fragility of the moment. He whispered encouragement. The horse blinked slowly, as if gathering the strength to take the next few steps. The cart came into view at last. Jacob motioned for the horse to rest while he fetched a small bucket of water he kept under the seat. The horse drank eagerly, though Jacob only let it take small amounts at a time. After a moment, he brought out a handful of fresh grass he had gathered earlier. The horse nibbled at it with a hunger that told Jacob it had not eaten properly in days. As the horse rested, Jacob set up the cart, fastening the ropes to secure a gentle path home. He had to be cautious. Moving an injured horse could worsen everything. He placed padding along the wooden slats to soften the ride. He moved with care, checking each board, each strap, making sure nothing would shift. The routine calmed him. It reminded him that even small acts of care could change things. When the horse seemed ready, Jacob guided it slowly toward the cart. The animal hesitated but did not resist. It trusted him, and that trust weighed heavily on his shoulders. He felt responsible in a way he had not expected when he first saw the struggling creature in the field. The journey to the farm began with slow turns of the wheels. The horse lay carefully, its head resting against the padded side. Jacob walked beside the cart, keeping pace. The sun had risen higher now, casting warm light over the land. Birds sang, unaware of the tension still surrounding this mysterious arrival. With each step, Jacob felt the question deepen. What had driven the horse to that field? Why had it survived when it seemed so hopeless? What miracle had kept it alive long enough for him to find it? The wind brushed across his face, carrying a faint scent of wildflowers from the distant meadows. It felt like a quiet sign, a whisper that this story was only beginning. Jacob did not know what waited ahead, but something told him that helping this horse would soon lead him into a mystery far larger than he imagined, a mystery that had already begun long before he stepped into that field. And as he walked beside the cart, he kept his eyes on the road, knowing deep down that whatever answers awaited him were already coming his way, carried on the same wind that brought this fragile life across his path. Jacob reached the front gate of the farm with the cart moving slowly behind him. The injured horse rested its head against the padding, breathing with uneven pauses that made Jacob listen closely every few steps. The farm looked peaceful as always, the wooden fence lined with tall grass waving in the breeze. But the calm around him did not match the heavy tension that had been building since he found the horse. Something felt off, like the land itself sensed a change coming. He pushed the gate open and guided the cart inside. The chickens scattered across the yard, clucking with their usual noisy curiosity. Jacob almost smiled at the sound because it made everything feel normal for a brief moment. But when he glanced at the horse again, the worry returned. Its eyes were half shut and its breath grew shallow. He knew he was running out of time to help it. He parked the cart beside the barn and reached for a bucket of clean water. Inside the barn, the air carried the familiar scent of hay and worn wood. This place had seen years of storms, years of harvests, years of quiet mornings. It had held sick calves, restless goats, and working horses who knew Jacob's voice better than their own names. But this horse was different. Its arrival felt like the beginning of something the farm had never faced before. He guided the horse slowly into one of the larger stalls. The soft layer of hay and the shade seemed to comfort it. Jacob placed more water nearby and watched as it drank in small, shaky sips. He crouched down beside it, carefully checking the injuries again. The swelling around the bee stings had grown. The horse flinched at his touch, though it did not pull away completely. He whispered calming words, hoping the sound of his voice would help settle the fear he felt trembling through its body. He needed Mrs. Hargrove. She had a way of seeing things in animals that others could not. Jacob wiped his hands on his shirt and hurried out of the barn. His house sat at the far edge of the farm, a small structure built by his father long before he was born. As he reached the porch, he grabbed the old wired phone under the window. The cord twisted as he dialed her number. It rang longer than usual. When she finally answered, her voice carried a breathless edge, like she had been in the middle of something important. Jacob explained the situation as quickly as he could. She asked a few sharp questions, her tone shifting into that mix of worry and purpose she always had when dealing with animals in trouble. She promised to come as soon as she finished tending to another sick cow on the west side of town. It would take time, and Jacob knew he could not just sit and wait. He hung up the phone and returned to the barn. The horse lifted its head when he entered, as if sensing his presence. Jacob sat down beside the stall door, letting his mind wander to the small but growing pieces of the conflict he could no longer ignore. The strange noises at night, the wandering animals, the fear in the eyes of creatures who usually moved with confidence across the land. Even the townsfolk had begun to talk in careful whispers when they thought no one was listening. Some blamed wild animals. Others blamed changes in the weather. But Jacob wondered if something else had been lurking beneath all those assumptions, something that connected everything in a way none of them had considered yet. The horse might just be the first clear sign. A soft knock came from outside the barn. Jacob stood quickly, half expecting Mrs. Hargrove, but instead he found Nate, his neighbor from 3 farms down, leaning against the fence with a nervous look. Nate was usually steady, a man who rarely worried. But today his hands fidgeted with the brim of his hat. Jacob asked if everything was all right. Nate hesitated before answering. He explained that 2 goats from his place had gone missing the night before. He had searched everywhere. No broken fences, no signs of attack, just vanished. And that was not all. He mentioned seeing tracks near the creek that morning. Not footprints he recognized. Not from any animal he had seen before, wide, deep, strange patterns in the mud. Jacob felt the tension crawl through him again. He asked Nate to describe them. Nate shook his head and said he could not explain it right, but it looked like something heavy had passed through, something walking with an odd stride. He glanced toward the barn, lowering his voice. He asked if Jacob had noticed anything unusual on his land recently. Jacob told him about the horse. Nate's eyes widened with a mix of curiosity and concern. He asked to see it. Jacob led him inside. Nate stood quietly for a long moment, studying the injured animal with narrowed eyes. He reached out but did not touch it, as if sensing the horse would react badly to a stranger's hand. He whispered that the horse looked frightened, not just hurt, frightened in a way that came from running. Jacob felt the same thing but had not said it aloud. Hearing Nate confirm it made his worry deepen. Nate stepped back and asked if Jacob had any idea where the horse came from. Jacob shook his head. No brand, no marks. No saddle wear. Nate rubbed the back of his neck, thinking hard. He mentioned hearing a rumor that someone outside town had been dealing with strange happenings, someone who lived far from the main roads. Folks said the person kept to themselves, that they had been asking around about a missing horse earlier in the week, but no one paid much attention. People assumed it was just gossip. Jacob felt a small chill run down his spine. Rumors had a way of turning into warnings when pieced together. He asked who the person was. Nate hesitated again, almost like he did not want to say the name, but eventually he whispered it. Jacob did not recognize it. Before Jacob could ask more, Nate stepped back with a tense breath, saying he had to check on his remaining animals. He offered to return later and help however he could. Jacob thanked him, though the unease remained. As Nate walked away, Jacob stood in the barn doorway, watching the dust rising around his footsteps. He knew now that whatever was happening, it was bigger than one injured horse. Something had unsettled the land, shaken the animals, and now it was creeping into their daily lives. He went back to the stall and sat beside the horse again. He spoke in a low voice, telling it that help was coming soon. The horse blinked slowly, its breathing still uneven. Jacob wished he could do more. He wished he had clearer answers. The mystery wound around him tighter with each passing hour. He spent the next part of the day preparing the farm for whatever might come. He checked the fences. He made sure the gates were secure. He brought the other animals closer to the barn. Every small sound made him pause, turning his head as if expecting to see something unusual moving through the trees. As the sun lowered, the long shadows stretching across the fields made everything feel even heavier. The wind picked up, carrying a faint scent that Jacob could not place, something wild. Something unsettled. He stood beside the barn door, listening. The horses, the cows, even the chickens seemed quieter than usual, as if sensing the same tension he did. He remembered the tracks Nate mentioned, the goats that vanished, the frightened look on the horse's face. All of it painted a picture that grew more troubling with every detail. Later in the evening, he heard distant hooves approaching the farm. His heart raced, thinking someone had come in search of the horse. But as the rider grew closer, Jacob recognized the familiar voice calling his name. It was Mrs. Hargrove at last, carrying her worn satchel of medicines and herbs. She climbed down from her horse and gave Jacob a firm nod. He helped her inside the barn, where she set her supplies carefully on a small stool. She studied the injured horse with a long, thoughtful gaze. Her hands moved gently but with purpose as she checked each wound. She whispered to the horse in her soft, experienced voice. After a long examination, she stood back with a troubled expression. She said the bee stings were not the only problem. The horse had bruises on its side, marks that suggested it had been running through rough terrain, scratches from branches, cuts from rocks, all signs of a desperate escape. Jacob asked if it would survive. Mrs. Hargrove said it depended on the night. If the horse made it through until morning, its chances would rise. Jacob promised he would stay beside it. But before she left, she pulled Jacob aside and lowered her voice. She told him she had heard talk as well, whispers from other farms about missing animals. She had seen strange tracks herself while tending to livestock outside town. She did not know what was causing all of it, but she felt certain the horse was connected somehow. Jacob felt his stomach tighten. He asked her what she thought was happening. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. She said something had changed in the land. Something that made animals restless and drove them away from familiar places. Something that pushed this horse into the field where Jacob found it. She squeezed his arm and told him to stay alert. Then she mounted her horse and rode off, disappearing into the dark. As Jacob returned to the barn, the night seemed thicker than usual. The injured horse shifted weakly, and Jacob sat beside it, determined to keep watch. He felt the weight of the mystery pressing in from all sides. The fear, the strange tracks, the whispers, the missing animals. Something was out there. And whatever it was, the horse had seen it first. Jacob rested his hand gently against its neck, knowing that before long he would have to face whatever waited beyond the farm. Jacob barely slept through the night, dozing off for minutes at a time before the restless shifting of the injured horse pulled him awake again. Every sound outside the barn made him lift his head and listen, wondering if the strange patterns from the past few days would return. The barn lantern threw a soft glow across the walls, flickering in a way that made the shadows seem alive. Even the animals in the nearby stalls were quieter than usual. Their breaths were slow, steady, but unsettled in a way he had never heard before. By dawn, Jacob felt both exhausted and determined. The horse had survived the night, though it was still weak and trembling. The swelling had gone down slightly, but the deeper bruises remained clear reminders of whatever it had run from. Jacob stroked its neck again, thankful it was still breathing. As sunlight slipped through the cracks in the barn walls, he stepped outside and took a long breath of the cool morning air. The farm was silent, not peaceful, but watchful. The wind barely moved the leaves. Even the birds that usually filled the sky with chatter seemed unwilling to sing. The quiet carried weight, as if nature itself was holding back. Jacob walked toward the fence line to check things again, but halfway there he froze. Fresh tracks covered the soft patch of dirt near the water trough. They were the same kind Nate described, deep and wide with strange spacing. Something had been there while Jacob watched over the horse, something heavy. Something bold enough to approach the farm during the night. His heart beat faster. He crouched down and touched the edge of one track. The dirt was still slightly warm. Whatever made those tracks had been close not long ago. He stood slowly and looked toward the tree line. Nothing moved. But the air carried a faint smell he could not describe, almost like damp earth mixed with something metallic. He backed away, feeling the tension coil tight in his chest. He hurried to the house and grabbed his old rifle, not because he wanted trouble, but because he knew he needed protection. This was not a time to take chances. With the gun slung over his shoulder, he returned to the barn, keeping his eyes fixed on the woods. Inside the barn, the horse lifted its head slightly, sensing Jacob's nervousness. He whispered to it, hoping to calm both of them. Jacob grabbed a handful of hay and placed it near the horse's mouth. It tried to eat but only managed a few small bites. As Jacob cleaned up the stall and added fresh water, he kept glancing toward the open barn door. He had faced storms, wild boars, and stray dogs before, but this felt different. The unknown had a way of growing larger in the mind, twisting into something darker with each hour. Around midday, Nate arrived again. His horse moved uneasily beneath him, its ears pinned back as if it sensed the tension in the air. Nate looked more worried than before. He climbed down and walked over to Jacob with long, hurried steps. Nate said he had found more tracks near his property, and they were leading toward Jacob's farm. He also said one of his cows had gone missing that morning. No signs of a struggle, no broken fence. Just gone? The fear in Nate's voice made Jacob's stomach twist. Nate was not a man who scared easily. Jacob told him about the tracks near the barn and the strange smell he noticed earlier. Nate walked over to see the prints for himself. He knelt down, examining them with a serious expression. He whispered that whatever made these tracks was not just wandering, it was looking for something. Maybe even returning for something. Jacob felt a cold shiver climb up his spine. He looked back at the barn, at the injured horse inside. For the first time, a thought crept into his mind that he had pushed away since the day he found it. What if the horse had escaped something dangerous, something that was now following its trail back to the farm? Nate stood and said they needed to tell the sheriff. Jacob agreed, but before they could leave, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, just enough to make them pause. It was faint but real, like something heavy had moved in the distance. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying that same strange smell again, but stronger this time. Jacob and Nate exchanged a look. Nate said they should get inside, at least for a moment, until they could decide what to do next, but Jacob shook his head. He could not leave the horse alone. They stepped into the barn together. The injured horse had lifted its head, nostrils flaring as if it sensed danger approaching. Jacob placed a hand on its neck again, feeling its whole body trembling. Nate walked to the far side of the barn, peering through the cracks in the wooden wall. He said he saw movement in the trees. Just a quick shift of branches, but enough to make his heart jump. Jacob heard his own breath tighten. He told Nate to keep watch while he prepared the rifle. A sudden noise echoed across the yard, sharp enough to make both men jolt. It sounded like wood snapping under heavy weight. Jacob moved to the barn door, Nate close behind him. They scanned the trees, but the shadows shifted in a way that made it impossible to see clearly. Jacob whispered that they needed to get the horse secured and ready to move if they had to. Nate nodded and went to fetch more rope. Jacob stepped closer to the horse, running his hand along its side. He could feel its muscles tensing. It looked toward the open door with wide, frightened eyes. Something was out there. The suspense grew tighter with every passing second. Jacob tried to stay calm, but his mind raced through every story he had heard over the years. Every unsettling tale about strange creatures, lost animals, and unexplained events. Most people brushed those stories aside, calling them exaggerations or myths. But now, with the farm growing colder and the shadows stretching longer, Jacob wondered if those tales held more truth than anyone cared to admit. Nate returned with the rope and said they needed to act fast. He secured the horse's halter while Jacob checked the barn doors to ensure they could close quickly if needed. The wind outside picked up again, blowing small bits of dust into the barn. The air felt heavier, as if carrying a warning. Jacob and Nate worked together with silent urgency. They looped the rope gently and prepared the horse to be moved. The horse shifted uneasily, ears flicking back and forth, sensing the same rising tension. Then another sound broke through the stillness. A deep thud, like something large dropping to the ground. Nate froze. Jacob felt a rush of adrenaline surge through him. They looked at each other, silently agreeing they had to move now. Jacob took hold of the rope and guided the horse toward the barn door. It hesitated, its legs shaking, but Jacob whispered to it again, promising it safety. Slowly, they stepped out into the open yard. The farm felt different, too quiet. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches hanging low as if waiting. Nate walked beside Jacob, scanning the woods with wide, careful eyes. The tension felt thick enough to touch. Halfway across the yard, the horse stopped suddenly, its head lifted high, nostrils flaring. It let out a sharp breath through its nose and refused to move. Jacob tried to coax it forward, but the horse backed up, pulling hard on the rope. Nate whispered that something was coming. Jacob turned, gripping the rope tighter. His pulse pounded in his ears. He looked toward the dark line of trees where the shadows had thickened. Something moved there, slow but deliberate. They could not see its shape clearly, but they felt its presence like a weight pressing against the air. Jacob stepped in front of the horse, trying to keep his body steady despite the shaking inside him. Nate on his right lifted a small piece of wood from the ground as if ready to defend himself with whatever he had. The wind went still again, and the silence felt crushing. The horse's breathing grew rapid. Jacob whispered soothing words, though his voice trembled. He could feel the conflict tightening into a raw, sharp point. The mystery was no longer distant, it was closing in. The animal kingdom felt unsettled, the land tense with unknown danger, and the horse carried secrets in its frightened eyes that no one yet understood. Everything they had feared was gathering in the trees, still unseen but undeniably near. Jacob knew the next moments would change everything. Jacob felt the horse pressing against him, trembling so hard he could feel each shake through the rope in his hand. Nate stood just a few steps away, eyes fixed on the dense line of trees where movement had stirred only moments before. The air felt heavy, as though the whole world had gone silent to listen. Jacob kept one hand on the horse's neck, grounding himself with its warmth as he waited for whatever was hiding in the shadows to reveal itself. The leaves rustled again, this time with a clearer rhythm, and Jacob braced himself. Then the shape finally broke from the trees. For a moment he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. It was not a wild beast, not something strange or monstrous. It was a large bull, scarred and battered, limping as it trudged into the open. Its ribs showed through its hide, and one of its horns was cracked. The bull looked worn out, defeated, like it had been chased for days. Jacob lowered the rifle he held in his right hand, feeling a wave of confusion wash through him. The bull staggered toward the water trough and collapsed beside it. Jacob slowly stepped forward, keeping his movements calm so the injured animal would not panic. Nate whispered in disbelief, saying he had never seen a bull in such rough condition. When Jacob stood closer, he saw deep cuts along its flank, marks that did not belong to coyotes or wolves. It looked more like the bull had bolted through thick brush at high speed, tearing itself open in a desperate attempt to escape something. Jacob knelt beside the bull and checked its breathing. It was weak but steady. He walked back toward the horse and realized something he had not expected at all. The injured horse behind him was no longer trembling. It had steadied itself, ears pricked forward, watching the bull with surprising calm. Jacob felt a slow understanding rise inside him. The creature they feared might not have been something hunting the horse. It might have been the bull chasing the horse, both fleeing from the same danger or from each other in blind panic during the storm. Pieces began to shift in Jacob's mind, settling into a picture that made more sense than any wild fear. The strange tracks around the barn matched the bull's hooves. Its odd gait explained the spacing. The missing cow from Nate's ranch could have been on the run with this bull, and maybe it had gotten separated or wandered off further than they thought. The odd smell Jacob had noticed was likely the bull's sweat mixed with dirt and blood, not something mysterious stalking the farm. Jacob let out a breath he had been holding for too long. The tension that had built up over the past days slowly loosened. He turned to Nate and said the creature they feared was nothing more than a lost, wounded bull. Nate stared at the bull and nodded slowly, still stunned that fear had shaped their imagination into something bigger than the truth. Together they coaxed the bull toward the barn, moving slowly so it would not collapse again. The horse followed Jacob willingly, as if understanding the threat had passed. Once inside, they secured both animals in separate stalls. The barn felt warmer now, not haunted by fear, but filled with the simple sounds of breathing animals and the rustling of hay. Jacob fetched water and clean cloth for the bull, doing what he could to clean the wounds. Nate helped him, steadying the animal when it shifted uncomfortably. They worked quietly for a while, letting the calm settle around them. When the bull finally lowered its head as if accepting their help, Jacob felt a sense of relief he had not felt since the first night the injured horse arrived. After tending to the animals, they stepped outside and sat on the fence rail. The afternoon sun stretched across the fields, and the wind finally picked up in a gentle way that felt normal again. Nate ran a hand across his face and said he felt foolish for letting fear take over. Jacob smiled and told him there was nothing foolish about being cautious when the unknown felt close. The truth was, fear had pushed both of them into action. It made them investigate, protect the animals, and look out for each other. In the end, fear led them to help the bull that might have died alone in the woods. Jacob realized how close they had come to misreading the signs. How quickly a few strange moments could turn simple uncertainty into full worry. They talked about the plan for the next few days. Nate said he would ride back to his ranch and look for the missing cow, hoping it was still wandering somewhere safe. Jacob said he would keep both animals in the barn until they were strong enough to travel. The horse still needed time to heal, and now the bull did too. The farm would be busy for a while, but Jacob did not mind. He felt a strange peace settling over the land, the kind that comes only after tension dissolves. As the sun lowered behind the hills, Jacob checked on the horse again. It lifted its head when he walked in, nudging his shoulder gently. Its eyes looked clearer now, less frightened, and he took that as a good sign. He whispered that everything was going to be fine. The horse chewed slowly on fresh hay, finally eating with more confidence. The bull rested quietly in the next stall. Jacob noticed its breathing had evened out. It was exhausted, but it would survive. He felt a deep gratitude that the outcome had not been worse. Later that night, Jacob sat on the porch with a mug of warm coffee, listening to the farm return to its natural rhythm. Crickets sang. The breeze rustled through the grass in an easy sway. The stars above shone brighter than they had in days, free from the haze of worry. Nate rode back after dark to check one more time on the bull. He said he had found signs his missing cow was likely still close by. Jacob told him he was welcome to stay the night, and they ended up sitting together under the open sky, talking about the unpredictability of ranch life and how even simple things could turn into mysteries when the mind filled in the blanks. Jacob realized that the story of the injured horse and the hidden canyon he discovered would likely become local talk soon, especially once people realized two animals had been missing and running wild. He knew folks would be interested in how a frightened horse led him toward a deeper truth. He also felt thankful that fear had not caused him or Nate to react in a harmful way. Instead, it brought out a side of them grounded in patience and responsibility. As dawn broke the next morning, Jacob walked back to the barn to check on the animals again. The horse was standing with better balance, its coat smooth in the early light. The bull, surprisingly, had managed to stand too. Jacob felt pride settle in his chest. Both animals had fought to survive, and now they had a second chance. He gave them food, water, and a calm pat on the neck. Standing there with both animals safe beside him, Jacob felt a sense of purpose deepen inside him. The fear, the tension, the unexpected turn of events had led to something meaningful. He had saved more than one life. He had found answers. And he had reminded himself that courage does not always look like charging into danger. Sometimes it looks like staying when fear tells you to run. As Jacob stepped out into the rising sun, he knew the land was peaceful again. The story would be remembered as a strange week of uncertainty, a reminder that even in the quiet countryside, surprises could appear without warning. But more than anything, it would be remembered as the moment a rancher listened to his horse, trusted his instincts, and discovered that sometimes the unknown hides something worth saving. The canyon, the fear, the lost animals, the long nights, the sharp tension, all of it had led to this calm morning, and Jacob felt grateful for every part of it.